Well, hello everybody. Welcome to our live Q&A. I am just making sure that our connections are working properly so that we can make sure our replay is captured. Um, if you have not joined us before, as you already know, my name is Brianna McWilliam, and we host typically two live events per month, usually to answer questions popping up surrounding your courses and questions. And it is open to all students and alumni. So even if you purchased a course years ago, you can still pop into a live stream and ask questions of me. Um, Usually what I'll do is I'll review the questions I received in advance, and inside your student dashboard when you log in, you'll see a module that says live events and replays. In there's the link to where you can pose your questions in advance, and I also send the link with every reminder twice a month. So in the future, if you want to offer questions in advance, it just gives me a little more lead time to formulate my thoughts around it. So today, what are we talking about? Well, let me pull up my notes here. So, a few questions we're going to be exploring today. What is the difference between fearful and dismissive avoidant attachment? What emotional triggers break through a dismissive avoidance boundaries? And what is the spiritual lesson available in avoidant attachment? So those are a few questions to get us started, and you are invited as I go through. If you have any questions, reflections, or experiences popping up, please feel invited to share them in the chat. And then I will take moments of rest and of pause to make sure that I am addressing and answering as many questions as I can. So, welcome, welcome. And if you'd like to just type your name and where you're coming from in the chat, that will give us a little sense of, or give me a little sense of who is joining us and is with me here on the call today. All right. So, the first question we had, I'll pull up my notes. Hmm. What are the significant differences between fearful avoidance and dismissive avoidance? So, in this segment, I want to spotlight the core differences between these two attachment styles so we can move from a place of self-judgment, right, to self-understanding and ultimately towards those secure and loving connections that we want. So this really isn't about labeling ourselves as broken in some way. It's really more about understanding the brilliant survival-based strategies that we might have developed long ago so that either we or our partners can consciously choose new ones in the relationships that we would like to grow and develop. So to start, it might be helpful to just examine why is it hard to parcel out the differences between these two attachment styles? Why do they seem so similar initially? So from the outside, fearful avoidance, sometimes called disorganized attachment, what I call the spice of lifer attachment, and dismissive avoidance, which I call rolling stone attachment. These patterns can look very similar. So both can pull away when things start to get close. Both might shut down or go quiet instead of sharing what's really going on with them. And both can send mixed signals that might leave you wondering where you stand. But typically, the inner experience is very different for fearful avoidant versus a dismissive avoidant person. So, for instance, both of them might cancel plans at the last minute. But for someone that is fearful avoidant, they may be flooded with emotion and they're starting to imagine everything that could go wrong. And all of a sudden, their nervous system flares up in a panic and they can't go because it's like their body has locked down. And then later, they replay the whole thing over and over and over again, feeling shame and regret over it. Whereas someone who's more dismissive, they may feel that growing sense of pressure or obligation, notice their energy and motivation dropping, and then decide to cancel in order to regain a sense of self-control. And usually it's without the same intense emotional crash or shame afterwards. Okay. For another example, both of them may need and take space after a conflict. Now, the fearful avoidant might obsess over the argument, want to reach out, but then feel too overwhelmed or afraid of making things worse. So maybe they stay silent while thinking about the other person nonstop and really hoping that they will reach out first. Maybe they like your posts on social media and extend a sort of subtle invitation, but they don't have it in them to initiate. Then we have the more dismissive avoidant partner. So they are more likely to, after a conflict, mentally compartmentalize and to focus on their own hobbies, maybe to throw themselves into work and to tell themselves it's easier just not to deal with it at all. So the distance that they experience winds up being more of a relief. Okay. Now, for another example, maybe with texting, both of them might respond inconsistently or slowly or with not a lot of words. For the fearful avoidant partner, they might be checking the phone constantly, drafting and deleting messages, and feeling anxious about saying the wrong thing. Whereas the more dismissive avoidant partner could feel relieved if they're not in constant contact, only answer when it feels convenient, and tell themselves and their partners that needing frequent communication is really just unreasonable. Okay. So on the outside, it can look like similar patterns of distance and mixed signals, but on the inside, the story is typically very different, right? And the differences in their nervous system activation, whatever the inner narrative might be, and the motivation of what really matters is significantly different. So the why behind whatever they're saying and doing is really worlds apart, right? And understanding that is kind of key to understanding the unique path that they both might take to feeling more secure and emotionally available in a relationship. So, the second part of this is I want to focus on sort of three foundational themes we see popping up in these differences. So, the first is that there's that inner emotional battle going on. What does that look like? Secondly, how they perceive themselves and others. And then thirdly, how their protective mechanisms work. So this is where the experience becomes very different when we're looking at what's going on in the internal space. So, like in our examples, for the fearful avoidant or the spice of lifer, their inner world typically looks more like a storm, right? There's a more conflict, inner conflict going on. There is a powerful, genuine, and very deep desire for closeness and love. And they want connection. They have a great capacity for it, and they crave that bond. But alongside it, there's usually an equally powerful fear of being hurt, abandoned, controlled, or consumed in some way. And so that creates this, what is often an exhausting push-pull dynamic where moving closer to someone feels terrifying, so they pull away, but then pulling away feels too lonely, so they want that closeness again. And so it's kind of this heart-wrenching cycle of I want you, but go away. For someone who's more of a rolling stone, dismissive avoidant, the inner world is more like a fortress of solitude. The primary goal here is self-reliance and independence. So if they do have an innate need for intimacy, but when they feel the pangs of it, they have developed a mechanism to suppress, deactivate, or dismiss it as necessary, right? So the internal story is it's not I want you, but I'm scared. It's I don't need you because needing you is a weakness, and I won't tolerate that, right? So they prioritize their independence and self-sufficiency really above everything else. And so they wind up constructing these walls not necessarily to always keep people out, but because they're trying to preserve their sense of self and the identity stories that they've told themselves necessarily in order to survive what they had to, right? So if you feel like you experience avoidant tendencies, you ask yourself, does your distance come from a place of wanting connection but fearing it? Or does it come from a place of feeling like, well, I'm really just better off without it? Right? So that's one way you might start to sift and sort through that distinction. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about was our perspective, our view of ourselves and others. So for our spice of lifer, the fearful avoidant, they are more likely to wrestle with a negative view of themselves and a more positive view of others, even though they're still fearful of others. So internally, there's that core wound of low self-worth. So I'm unlovable, I'm not enough, yet I'm too much. I will be rejected if I'm truly seen and known. Yet they still see others as a source of the love and validation that they really crave, even if they are too scared to reach for it. On the other hand, we have our Rolling Stone, the dismissive avoidant, who maintains that positive view of themselves and a more negative or dismissive view of others. So their self-concept is built on the idea that I'm the strong, silent type. I'm the rock. I'm the island. I'm the one who has it all together, right? And so they see themselves as very competent and self-sufficient, and usually because they are. That's one of their strengths. However, they can view others as needy, dependent, unreliable, or a threat to this hard-won autonomy and self-sufficiency and the successes that they think they've gained as a result of that, right? So there is a difference in the protective logic at play. One says, I'm not good enough for you, and the other one says, I'm just better off on my own. Okay. Then that leads us into the discussion, of course, around protective mechanisms. So, what is the ultimate goal of the distancing behavior? Why do they pull away? So, for someone who is disorganized, fearful, avoidant, what I like to call a spice of lifer, they pull away usually because it's a desperate or anxiety driven act of self preservation. The distance is a shield against anticipated pain, rejection, humiliation, or being abandoned. It's kind of a reactive emotional strategy. I'm going to hurt you before you hurt me. Or I'm going to leave the situation because the intensity is overwhelming and I'm going to lose myself in it. Whereas someone who's a rolling stone, more dismissive avoidant, they pull away usually as a core strategy for preserving their identity. So for them, connection is a threat to a carefully crafted identity of being the strong one. So if they start to enjoy closeness or emotional connection too much, and by too much, I mean they start feeling some of their own vulnerable, softer feelings, that feels like a red alarm that they're becoming too dependent. And that means they're weak. And therefore, they'll become unreliable or subject to losing the success of what they've built in their lives, predicated on the idea that they are strong because they are not weak and vulnerable. So now the softer feelings feel like a threat, like they're going to tear down the identity story of I survived because I'm strong and I don't need anyone. So it's an identity threat. So they deactivate their attachment needs by focusing on flaws in their partner, be throwing themselves into work instead, distracting themselves with other things, retreating into hobbies, right? To protect their foundational identity as a self-reliant individual. So I'm going to take a pause there. I know I just threw a lot at you. Does any of this sound familiar? Maybe you have struggled with these stories or these tendencies, or maybe you've witnessed this in a partner. How did that show up for you? Right. Looking forward to hearing dismissive avoidant must be a conscious strategy. I would know. I hear this identity, self-reliant. Yeah. So sometimes it's conscious, a lot of the times it's unconscious, right? A lot of the times it's something that we're just operating on habitually because it's how we learn to survive the environments and the situations that we grew up in or that we've experienced in the past, right? But as we start to get towards an experience of readiness for change, we start becoming more consciously aware of our narratives and we start being able to recognize them when we hear them, right? So to just kind of wrap this up and bring it all together, we might say the disorganized or the fearful avoidant is caught in this storm between their heart's desire and their brain and nervous system's survival fear. Whereas our rolling stone or the dismissive avoidant tends to build more of a fortress around their heart and they're valuing self-sufficiency and independency above what would be required for intimacy. So, if you have seen yourself in any of this, then I would have you just to take a breath, a deep, compassionate breath, and realize that attachment styles, they're not a life sentence, they are adaptations. And we developed what really are brilliant strategies as the most functional way to be in what was likely to be a dysfunctional environment or situation. But when we feel like we're at a point of readiness for change, now we are opening up to the idea that we have more resources and opportunities and supportive people at our disposal, right? And understanding that becomes that first step towards change. And it moves us from what is wrong with me to, oh, this is how I learned to protect myself. And so, from that place of curiosity, appreciation, and compassion, as opposed to criticism and beating ourselves up with how we're not healed enough and all of that. From that place, our capacity for love grows. Our capacity for retaining our autonomy while inviting in someone to participate in our emotional experiences, learning that we can rely on some people, even if we can't rely on all people, becomes clearer to us, right? And so, gently and patiently, these walls become more flexible, firm but flexible, rather than brittle and fragile, right? So if you're struggling with that, these are the themes and the topics that we explore in our membership. For those of you that aren't aware of it, we do have a live weekly group coaching membership program. It's called the Secure Spark Studio. And so in the studio, we really adopt the idea that this is not about fixing ourselves, right? It's about having a space mentally, emotionally, physically, where we can practice these shifting our perceptions of ourselves as a lifestyle, right? So, in my experience, I've had 20 years of experience working with, at this point, more than 6,000 clients and students. And in my work, we do this through creativity, through nervous system regulation, and through skill building through the lens of soulful reflection, right? And so, if you're interested in learning more about the membership, I'll include a link to that with the replay of this video. You are welcome to join us. And we dig into these things with creative arts exercises, EFT tapping practices, guided visualizations, and journeys. So we have a lot of fun in that space, and it's really my belief that healing doesn't have to be a painstaking drudgery, digging up the past and having to relive old wounds. I think we can explore these things creatively through fun, through metaphor, through creativity, because that is how that information is stored in the body anyway, as energy. And the body organizes our emotional energy through symbols, through metaphor, through creativity, right? So again, if you want to learn more about that, I'll leave a link around the replay of this video. And I would love to know how this is resonating with you. So we have some questions popping up in the chat. Readiness for change, yes. Desire cotton head. Feelings, not feeling anything in my heart. Yeah. Can you expand on the FA feeling of lose myself when you said I'm going to get overwhelmed in the intensity and lose myself? What does losing oneself look like? Loss of control, freaking out, anger, or something else? So it's more of a psycho-emotional experience, and it's usually the result of having experienced an enmeshed family dynamic. So when we are in an enmeshed system, you basically have people who on the surface appear to be very loving and concerned with your welfare, but they are doing it to the point where they dismiss your autonomy. So for instance, you have a headache. Oh, now I feel sick, right? Um, I'm glad that you forgave them, but they haven't asked for my apology yet, even though they have nothing to do with what happened, right? Or, no, you don't want that. You want this. Trust me, I know what's best for us, right? Or, um, what's another example? What, no, of course I need to be there for your special occasion, but what about my pain and my struggle of getting there, and not everything is about you. Oh, you're upset about something? I must be a terrible mother. Oh my gosh, you hate me, don't you? So there are all of these communications we get in an enmeshed scenario where The family system is pushing out your experience. You're not allowed to have it. You're not seen as someone with agency, but at the same time, you're sort of being shamed for not having agency. What? You could never do that on your own. But I'm so ashamed that you haven't figured it out yet, right? Or you could never do that without me. But it's so embarrassing that you haven't figured it out for yourself. So there's a lot of mixed messages, mixed signals, and there's no easy way through it. So when you get into that scenario, usually it's with in a family system. This is particularly true if someone in the family system has a more narcissistic tendencies. Not necessarily going to say diagnoses, but tendencies, because they see you as an extension of themselves. They don't understand that you have your own mind, thoughts, feelings, desires, wants, etc. So whatever you do is somehow a reflection on them, right? So when someone who's fearful avoidant gets in a relationship, they're sort of half anticipating that because that's what their experience of closeness has been, right? I hope that makes sense. Retaining autonomy, flexible and brittle. Yeah. So yes, so I can share, actually, I might have the link right here. I do. This is the link to the membership. If you're interested, you can check it out. I hope that, oh, good. I'm glad that was helpful. I'm feeling the need for space for my partner right now, but I don't want to break it off with her. It's just too chaotic at my house with her and her daughter living with me. There's not enough space because neither of us is tidy enough to keep things clean all the time with a 5-year-old, her big dog, and my 11-year-old. It's exhausting, but at the same time, I love our sense of family and togetherness. I just find myself with such a low capacity for the chaos. I have dismissive avoidant tendencies and I don't want to hurt her. Any advice? Um, it sounds like it sounds like you might actually be a highly sensitive person. So sometimes dismissive avoidance looks, or being a highly sensitive person looks like dismissive avoidance because you're almost like a circuit breaker that gets blown if there's a lot of stimulation. And with a 5-year-old and 11-year-old, there's going to be a lot of stimulation, not to mention a big dog. And you're in one space with maybe not, there's not any sense of order to it. Like you both don't have a tendency to put things away when you need to or what have you. So I think, in Gottman's work, he talks about solvable versus unsolvable problems. This sounds like a solvable problem, honestly. It seems like you just need to establish some boundaries around routine, create some time and space in the schedule where you get to have alone time, and be honest with your partner about the overstimulation that's going on in your environment. Because that sounds really about more about like what's going on. So, obviously that could be a longer conversation with your own therapist or counselor or someone that can provide you more detailed support. But my gut response is this is a solvable problem. And you're already feeling like, you like the sense of family. So maybe there's a story that says, well, I can't have it because it overwhelms me, and having family means you have to just suffer with being overwhelmed. And so I would just challenge that to say, I don't think that's the case. This sounds like you can work it out. Yeah. So I would have you maybe shift, also kind of shift your identity story. You're more highly sensitive. What if the avoidant pushes you away and says they can't be in a relationship? Do you trust your gut and check in occasionally or just let them be? My gut says they care deeply but need time to heal. Why do I feel unloved? Okay, so there's like 3 questions there. Um, when someone pushes you away because they say that they can't be in a relationship, listen to them. Now, but I feel like they do care. So this is where it's really helpful to adopt or to learn about internal family systems theory by Richard Schwartz. And basically, it says that we have different aspects of our personality. You've probably heard this more through the language of like inner child healing or something like that. But it's the idea that different aspects of our personality carry different emotional concerns. So when someone is avoidant, we characterize them that way because their habit of thought and frequency of behavior and attitude suggests that their fears outweigh their desires. So it doesn't mean they don't care about you. In fact, they could care about you quite a lot, maybe even to the fullest extent of their capacity, and still can't be in a relationship with you because it is their fearful part that is in charge, not their wanting part, not their loving part, right? And of course, the paradox is even the fearful part is loving because it's behaving in what it believes to be the person's best self-interest, which we could qualify as ultimately loving, right? So if he feels like he's overwhelmed, he's not ready. Not ready. I'd believe him. And it doesn't mean you have to like, well, it depends on how you feel, right? If you feel unloved by that, then you both probably have a mirroring wound that has attracted you to each other, right? Because there may be the parent that was overwhelmed by the energy of the child, right? This is kind of have a theme popping up in our discussion here, right? Maybe there's the parent who's overwhelmed by the child, and so the child gets the message, I'm too much, I'm too needy, right? I'm too burdensome to my parent. Meanwhile, the parent's trying to be a good parent, but they're overwhelmed. And they want to be there for the kid, but the overwhelmment is making it difficult, right? So it may be that you've been attracted to each other because you have this similar but mirroring wound. And so I'd say maybe the work there is just to sit with, oh, when they come up with this expression of I can't do this because I'm overwhelmed, what story is that bringing up in me? And how might it be in my best interest to slow down and sit with that story in my own space, right? In my own mental emotional journey, right? Because there might be something there that this partner came in to show you so that you can kind of like sweep out those corners, and that just creates more space for the kind of resonant love you're looking for to come in and occupy space in your life, right? I hope that was helpful. Okay, I'm glad. I see you shaking head there. Nice to see your face. Um, okay, great questions. Thank you for sharing. We did have another one here I thought I'd bring to the discussion. Okay, so this one is about triggers. Okay, okay. What emotional triggers break through dismissive avoidant boundaries? Okie dokie. So for whomever was asking this, or for our inquirer, I'm going to guess that they're likely in a situation where they do care really deeply for someone, and maybe they pull away the closer that they get. And so our inquirer could be experiencing like the whiplash of feeling that real, genuine connection one moment, and maybe that's something they've really wanted for a long time. But then they're met with this kind of wall of silence, and their partner's just pulling back right when it feels like things are getting good. And so that can lead us to a sense of confusion. We're a little bit heart sore, right? And we're wondering, am I doing something wrong? Is it me? And so then we wind up walking on eggshells, trying to strategize every moment of connection, trying to be perfect, lower the pressure, all the while having this kind of underlying need for connection that's feels as if it's being starved, right? Like a fan whirring in the background. And so if you feel like you've loved someone who was scared of that love, right? Someone who equates intimacy with losing themselves, as we've discussed, then we're going to talk about, in reference to this question, not forcing down somebody's walls to try to win them over. Instead, let's look at this from the angle of building a door that they might feel safe enough to walk through on their own, right? So I invite you to stick with me, and I'm going to share some of the what I think might be a crucial, not triggers in the traditional sense, but emotional moments, right? That could create the opening for secure connection with an avoidant partner that is ready. So we have to first talk about what do I mean by an avoidant partner who is ready, right? So it has just been my experience over the past 20 years of working with these things that you cannot force a breakthrough with someone who is dismissive avoidant and honestly fearful avoidant. You might have heard phrases like, oh, well, they just haven't met the right person yet. I think that is more applicable with our anxious open hearts because their attachment style is characterized by being deeply responsive and receptive to other people's influence. And so when a more secure partner comes along, their anxiety calms down because they are just oriented that way. They are receptive to that. But that's not true for our avoidant partners, particularly dismissive avoidant partners. I have found that for them, it's a lot more about timing. So they have to be ready to change. They have to want more than what they have experienced thus far. And so for them, the benefits of change or their perception of change have to outweigh the risk of getting hurt. And in my experience, that doesn't usually happen until they've experienced some kind of significant or catalytic moment in their lives. Usually it's a painful one, and it can shake their sense of control and self-sufficiency, but it also gives them a glimpse of what they've been missing. It doesn't have to be painful though. It could be a deeply transcendent or spiritual experience. Sometimes it's synchronicities in nature and it just kind of shakes them awake. But I would say, unfortunately, more often than not, it is something that's painful. And usually that's because of the isolative and constricted nature of their survival mechanisms and identity stories. So it requires a little ego death that has to occur before different parts of their authentic self can come up, right? Their childlike aspects can come up because they've been suppressed for so long. And I say that because I have been disorganized in the past, leaning towards avoidance, and I have had quite a few ego deaths. I had a very strong ego, and it had to be torn down by life circumstances before I was willing to look at growth and expanding my perspective from a place of curiosity, creativity, and transcendence, as opposed to justifying my pain. So, readiness for change. What does that look like? Well, it looks like someone who is self-reflective, right? Self-aware. Someone who maybe you have an argument, but they come back and they say, you know what? That stung, but the larger thing we're building here is important to me and I want to work this out. How can we do that? Right? It is someone who and they show up maybe in their own subtle ways, showing their affection for you. They're not withholding of their affection, right? They're open and willing to communicate about stuff, even if it's hard. And they make mistakes, right? They're not going to do it perfectly, but they're willing to own the mistakes and they want to work through them. And so, to my mind, that's someone who is ready for change. They're someone who's making plans and they're following through on them. Their words match up with their actions, right? Sometimes you can have people who are willing to make plans, but then when it comes to following through on them, they're not willing to do it. So, they're really, in that case, they're not actually ready. They're just paying lip service to you. But they are practicing making plans. So, you can decide how much patience you're willing to give that, right? So if you feel like you've witnessed that, if you feel like you yourself are able to do that, or you have a partner that's able to do that, then these next three, let's call them emotional experiences or pillars, could be helpful to you. So the first thing is, let's say we're building this door for connection with an avoidant partner. We want to adopt this attitude of boundaried acceptance. So when someone is dismissive avoidant, their entire defense system is kind of built around this core fear, which is if I let you in, you're going to overwhelm, control, disappoint me, take away my autonomy, right? So their independence isn't just a preference. It's, as we said before, it's this fortress that they've built inside. And so, what is the ultimate threat to a fortress? A siege, right? Pressure, demands, criticism, anything that feels like an attack. So the most powerful trigger to lower those defenses would be the exact opposite. We practice modeling a safe harbor. So what does that look like? Well, it means we're not pressuring for immediacy, right? Immediate answers or immediate response or more. It means that we learn to respect space, maybe even enjoy space ourselves. Sometimes avoidant partners come into our lives to teach us the benefit of spaciousness, right? We learn how to be in greater command of our emotional responses. A lot of us like to share our emotional experiences. We like to work it out in conversation with someone else. We like to mix our emotions with their emotions and see what kind of recipe we can come up with. And that's one of the fun aspects of being in a relationship. But for someone that leans more towards an avoidant disposition, most likely that is not something that they've practiced, at least not in a healthy way. Maybe it's been practiced on them in an unhealthy way. So they have all these negative beliefs about it, right? So when we learn emotional discipline, it doesn't mean we're suppressing our emotions. It means that we are learning to allow those emotions to move through us, because emotions are energy moving through the body, to listen to the lessons that they have for us, and then to make conscious choices about how we will respond to that, express it, and invite other people to participate in it. So that's what I mean by emotional control. So showing up with more emotional control. Let's say, for example, an avoidant partner says, I need some space. Well, one way you might respond to that might be, okay, I understand. When can I expect that we'll reconnect? That'll give me something to look forward to. Instead of a panicked, are you losing interest? Where did I go wrong? Now, of course, what you say is going to depend significantly on what phase of a relationship you're in, because, like all things in life, relationships grow. So, what it needs at the beginning of a relationship is different than what it's going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 years in. So, as the relationship progresses, let's say this is in the earlier phase of a relationship initially. So, let's say now it's progressing and you're giving it a little time because you're observing what is true of their needs and what is true of your own needs. So, how much time do they seem to naturally want to take? And what comes up for you in the space that they take? And over time, do they need less space and time, or do they seem to take more and more? And then notice what it feels like, what comes up for you in those moments. Are you coming up against an edge, right? And if you are coming up against an edge, now it's time to establish boundaries around that. So you're not just catering to their defense mechanisms or survival strategies. You are honoring and respecting them while at the same time challenging them to establish some standards for compatibility where you will be able to meet in the middle. So, for example, over the past few months, I've noticed that after a moment of intimacy, you take time and space and basically cut off contact for 2 to 3 days. And I'm wondering, what does that time and space do for you? Because for me, I'm a little lonely. And having some form of connection after intimacy is really important for me in an evolving romantic relationship. So I want to find a way that we can stay connected without taking away what feels good for you. Are you open to exploring some possibilities there, trying something out, right? Because we can be, and this is obviously my language, people can use their own language, but the fundamentals are that we're respecting and honoring there's something about what they are doing that they feel they need and require, but we are also reminding them that this is a shared emotional space. And there's something that you need and want in that emotional space. So, can you come together to come up with co-creative solutions that feel good to both of you? Sometimes you can't, and that's really good information, and you don't want to ignore it. So you definitely want to have these conversations, right? So being that consistent, having a predictable presence, being emotionally in charge of yourself, basically teaches them, models for them a new truth, which is this person is not a storm that I need to protect myself from. And I can relax in a shared space with them while challenging myself to come out of my shell, right? So you are proving that you're a safe person with respectful curiosity and a non-reactive presence, right? And I'm always a little bit hesitant to share this because sometimes our anxious partners who've always been told they're too much feel like I'm telling them to tamp down their emotions, right? And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is be in charge of your emotions. That means being in deep relationship to your emotions. That means don't escape your own triggers and anxiety by seeking something to relieve it right away. Sit in that anxiety. What is it showing you? What part of your body does it live in? What young child aspect is sitting in the middle of that anxiety and is upset because you're not looking at it? You're trying to fill it up with something or someone else. So I'm not saying to our anxious partners, don't feel your feelings, become put on a face and persona so that your avoidant partner feels better. Not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you be in charge. Be your sovereign self. Don't wait for somebody else to set the tone. Know your boundaries, know what you need, and be in charge of it enough that you can create space enough to share it with someone else and extend that invitation. And then give them all the space in the world that they need to choose it, to choose you to accept that invitation or not. Because that's all you really need to know so that you can allocate your resources, your tremendous, amazing, beautiful, open-hearted resources to someone that can show up and share it with you. So the last or the second point, respect for their autonomy and your own, which is basically what I just described. But basically, it's this idea that for our dismissive avoidant partners, they tend to believe that being in a relationship means I have to sacrifice some aspect of myself. I won't be strong anymore, weak or vulnerable. I'm obligated to somebody else's emotional demands, so on and so forth. So, a really powerful way to prove that you are not a threat to that is to actively honor the very thing that they think you want to take away, which is their independence. So, celebrate that. And that doesn't just mean, praising them or supporting their projects. It also means letting them see you as a full, vibrant person in your own right. So, yes, it can look like supporting their hobbies, being fine with them having time alone, spending time with their friends without you, so on and so forth. And, you know, that's fine. But just as important is allowing them to witness you lighting up in your own passions and talents. You don't have to shower them with all that praise to get their attention. Simply inviting them to see you in your element, enjoying your work, witnessing your creativity, seeing you hang out with your friends without them, reminds them, oh, this person is their own individual too, and they like, love, and respect that about themselves. And for a dismissive avoidant person, that's incredibly attractive and sexy. And in fact, it makes them a little anxious, right? They tend to admire self-possession, self-direction, and a grounded sense of individuality. And when they see that you can love them in that way without collapsing your life into theirs, now their nervous system starts to relax. And when their nervous system starts to relax, they'll start feeling the feelings that they've cut off for so long. So this is why sometimes avoidant people are avoidant until they meet someone who's more independent than them, and then they become anxious. And so it's not that the person they meet has to be more avoidant than them. It's just that the person that they meet, their self-sufficiency stems from what I'm going to call a soul-aligned place, right? A place of deeply knowing the self. Whereas an avoidant person's self-sufficiency comes from an outward resistance. It's a sense of identity that comes from pushing against. And that's very different from stemming from a place of deep inner knowing and emotional control, right? You wouldn't be avoidant if you weren't avoiding the feeling of anxiety. Or anxiety is a broad term, the existential dread, which is really what it is, right? Mm-hmm. So, in other words, as you show up as your autonomous self, it just naturally expresses respect for their autonomy. And it's just a demonstration that relationships can be made up of two interdependent people who also enjoy passion, connectedness, and togetherness, and manage to retain their sense of individuality and autonomy in the relationship. And I also like to say that sometimes when you're in a relationship, you can actually become more of your autonomous self. Because when we're left to our own devices, we're oftentimes habitually operating under the stories we were fed, right? The stories that were fed that became unconscious, that are not challenged unless something in our outer world challenges it, right? So sometimes you get into a relationship with someone who challenges it. And now what happens? Well, now you have an opportunity to know more of yourself, which means you get to be more of yourself, and you wouldn't have had that opportunity unless you were in the relationship. Now, that's of course one circumstance. Sometimes it's the other way around. You're in, as I described before, an enmeshed circumstance, and there's actually no room for you to be yourself in that relationship. So, in those circumstances, getting out of it and spending time on your own, now you get to explore more of who you are and you get to become more of who you are out of relationship, right? So both are true. It just depends on where you're coming from. And wherever you're coming from on that, whichever end you're coming at it on that spectrum, your growth is going to mean moving in one direction or moving in the other, right? There's no one standard for growth. It just depends on where you are on that spectrum. Okie dokie. I'm getting very chatty. All right, the third point. Expressing emotional vulnerability with invitation as opposed to demand. So we have our Rolling Stones, our dismissive avoidants, who are usually scared of two things: their own big emotions and the emotional demands of other people. So a lot of times we'll have folks trying to connect to them to stimulate some vulnerability because they're genuinely, sincerely curious and want to know, tell me what you're feeling. Can you please open up to me? What do you need? Right? Because they want to meet that need, because they want to participate in their emotional experiences, because that's how intimacy grows. But for the avoidant Rolling Stone, the idea of needing anything is going to conflict with the idea of the story. Well, I'm strong because I don't need anyone or anything, and you love me because I'm strong, right? So let's not like shoot ourselves in the foot here. So there is a way around this, and I would say instead of regarding the avoidant partner's emotional experiences as needs, reframe them as values, right? If you want to learn more about them, just ask, what do you value and prioritize most in a relationship, and how can I contribute to that? Now, if you want to ask for their support with something, it can sound like, I value when someone is able to listen to me and be present without needing to fix what I'm talking about or turn it into a problem. And that just looks like holding my hand and listening to what I'm saying. That just eases the tension for me, and I appreciate that. Do you think you could help me with that? Because, man, I had a rough day at work and I'd love to vent to someone. So, we are teaching them through modeling, hey, emotions can be shared without it becoming a crisis, right? Vulnerability doesn't mean it has to be a bottomless pit of need. And so it's basically expressed as a quiet but powerful invitation as opposed to a demand. And it allows that emotional exposure to be experienced as a safe invitation. It's more manageable and it can even bring people closer, right? Okie dokie. So let's kind of start to bring this all together. So if you feel like you've been stuck, and maybe you are the one trying to love someone and you feel like you're being pushed away, I would have you see it more as a shift in energy as opposed to strategy, right? So you want to shift your focus not on breaking down someone's walls, right? Because the original question was, what emotional triggers break through a dismissive avoidance boundaries, right? So we're shifting our focus from trying to break down their walls to really just building a garden right outside their door, right? One that's beautiful, that's safe, that smells good, that is enticing, that is respectful, and so authentically beautiful that they can't help but want to open the door and smell the roses, right? To want to open the door and explore that garden. So the journey is really not about changing them. It's about embodying a new way of relating and just one that communicates safety, respect, and also a little bit of a challenge, right? And usually that's expressed through boundaried vulnerability. And no one here is asking for too much, right? All needs are welcome, all needs are valid. The challenge is how do we see through and past our habitual conditioning so that we can make enough space for all needs to be made valid, to make space for everyone's emotional experiences, and ultimately to decide if we are compatible. Sometimes we are, and sometimes we're not, right? And sometimes it's painful and disappointing when we're not. But even in recognizing the incompatibility, you're also unconditionally loving and accepting the other person. And that's a profound gift you can offer someone, even if the relationship doesn't last. That's something that stays with a person in a good way. So I'd have you keep honoring that within yourself, right? So I hope that's helpful. Thank you to everyone who joined me here today. I think we're coming to it's probably a good stopping point for our discussion. And I did see a question about the membership, was it? Couples or individuals? Okay. So the membership is a group coaching program. So we show up once a week and we explore themes according to the seasons of nature, actually. So in my assessment, the seasons of nature correspond to our attachment dynamics and inner workings. So, for example, right now we're exploring fall season, and the fall is all about releasing our illusions, attachment patterns that are not serving us anymore, looking at our limiting beliefs and so on, attraction patterns, black and white thinking, and embracing a concept of transcendent love in our lives so that we can show up, we can shift our orientation towards ourselves. Because a lot of times we have a belief, well, once I'm less anxious, then I'll be more secure. Once I'm less avoidant, then I'll be more secure. Once I'm less fearful, then I'll be more secure. But I think we're already secure. What's happened is we're just over identified with the avoidant, anxious, or fearful part of ourselves. So becoming secure is really just about reorienting ourselves to our own anxiety. I can be anxious and secure. I can have uncomfortable feelings and be secure because of how I hold and navigate those feelings, right? Not because I'm eliminating them from my vocabulary, which we wouldn't want to do because that's a whole part of the human experience you'd be cutting yourself off from, right? So, anyway, the point is it's a year-long curriculum, but you can join at any time. The only thing I recommend is to complete at least one whole cycle because then you'll get a lot of benefit from that. So if you're interested in learning more, you can definitely join. You can hop in. If you want to do it with a partner, of course, you can purchase a membership and you can do it together, show up on the Zoom call together or what have you. That's up to you. So I hope that that's helpful. And we will be back next month with two more live Q&As. Sometimes I do workshops on a specific theme or topic. If you have a question you'd like me to consider in advance, again, remember to submit it through your student dashboard under the live events and replays module, or you can just check out the reminder email I sent out today. The link is there as well. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your reflections and your thoughts. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week. Oh, I'm glad that was helpful, John. Thank you, Elizabeth, Brett, Christina, Denise. Thank you.